Otherwise, this obscures another trade-off, which is essentially we're being asked to further intensify and increase production on today's system, concurrent with continuing to throw away 10 to 50% of the amount of production that we're generating. But let's go back to hunger for a little bit. Regarding hunger, what are the real alternatives? Well, productivity is often viewed as the bottom line. You need enough food for enough people. But if you look at how hunger and malnutrition has been historically remedied, for example, the very extensive analysis done by Lisa Smith and Lawrence Haddad of decreases in infant malnutrition between 1970 and 1995, 75% of this decrease was from factors other than national food availability, with most of that decrease actually being from increases in women's education. Well, that's all well and good, one might say, but you still need to have the basic food requirements, otherwise these other factors might not matter. I think that statement is highly contestable, but let's assume it for the time being. It's nonetheless true that Lisa Smith also found that 80% of malnourished children live in countries with dietary surpluses. So to start to wrap up, I want to go into a little bit less depth, but quickly address, I think, what are some other important misspecifications or omissions from the land-sparing model. Another significant one being the lack of account it takes of other major economic and policy actors. What I mean by that is that many of our cultural and social institutions around the world have an explicit agenda of continued economic growth. One way to look at this effect on biodiversity are a couple of studies by Mickelson and Holland and colleagues, and they found that economic footprint, the size of the economy as compared to the land area of a country, and the level of inequality have strong correlations to biodiversity loss, much stronger, for example, than population density. Land sparing says nothing about either one of these factors directly, and so it seems like it might behoove us to ask more questions about what we might do about these factors. There's also simply common sense. I think being a scientist, we have to recognize that no system growing indefinitely is going to be sustainable in a non-infinite world, and the Earth is a non-infinite world. So unless land sparing deals with, I think, the continued expansion of industries and the human economy beyond simply food, we're really sort of missing the forest for the trees in terms of the larger dynamics of biodiversity loss and resource overexploitation. So in the perhaps very brief remaining time, I want to review some recent negative results from the literature that I think reflect some of the omissions from the land-sparing model. For example, both DeFries et al. And Rudell et al. Have recently found from global data sets very little reason to think that intensification is generally accompanied by land sparing. Something else that's interesting is in Rudell et al.'s study, they found a minority of countries did have evidence of land sparing, but in most of these there was a much larger than average increase in imports of grains. When you pair this with DeFries et al.'s finding that exports along with urban population size, urban population growth were the strongest predictors of deforestation, you raise the interesting possibility that the land sparing seen in the Rudell study actually is a phenomenon of the displacement of deforestation from importing countries to food exporting countries. So is another way really possible? What I mean by this is a lot of people might point out, well, this information about education, information about women's equality is all very well and good, but these are very big problems and they're very hard to address. Can we really expect there to be a big change in the future? Which I think then it's important to think of what I've termed a parsimony of expectations. And by this I mean that most indicators right now for the environment and for a number of things are going the wrong way. So if we really are just going to assume the least change possible, if we're going to extrapolate from current conditions, then by definition we're precluding the possibility of a solution. We have to assume there's going to be a discontinuous change in order to assume that we're going to be able to successfully address conservation, hunger, and a number of other problems. The other thing is that land-sparing research already implies a necessary break with this parsimony because it requires, according to several recent articles, a discontinuity in policy anyway. They all admit that the present land use regimes are not going to be enough to really support a land-sparing phenomenon. I propose that if we're already pushing for a step change in policy, it makes as much, if not more, sense to push for changes that support a number of social justice objectives. For example, education, greater gender equality, access to health care, etc. Importantly, these have been shown to significantly increase productivity itself in a number of cases, and they also have been shown very consistently to decrease malnutrition and in some cases contribute to slowing population growth. Besides that, another advantage to these objectives is that social justice is useful for its own sake. Greater gender equality is a good in its own right. Conversely, I would argue that increasing productivity should not be seen as relevant or an important change unless it also conclusively precipitates other changes as well. It simply is not a good in and of itself. So to conclude, it's been said that scientists don't give up their rights and responsibilities as citizens to push for policies and politics that they think will do some good. Besides agreeing with that statement itself, I and many of us are fortunate as people concerned with conservation that advancing certain social justice goals can also themselves in turn help increase productivity, as well as help to change rather than accept or adapt to a wasteful and profligate system. Thank you.